The Non-Profits is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of listeners like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.
Left us years ago, so there ain't no fate except the one you make, and there ain't no hell except the shit you take every day. So don't tell me life doesn't hurt, and that you don't need the people cause you've got your church. You gotta take your head out of the sky, because there ain't nothing there but the satellites.
And we are the Non-Profits. I'm Denis Loubet, along with what remains of Jeff D. and Russell Glasser, coming to you live from the crumbling Free Thought Library in Austin, Texas, in the last hours of the 15th of February, 2017. We are sponsored by what's left of the Atheist Community of Austin, what once was a non-profit educational organization for the promotion of positive atheism and the separation of church and state, and now, well, what little is left to learn can be found by calling their voicemail at 512-220-6561 or visiting their dying website at www.atheist-community.org. The Non-Profits attempts to broadcast what it can every first and third Wednesday of each month from 7:30 to 9 Central Time. And for what it's worth, you can join our dimly lit chat room by following what directions you may at www.nonprofitsradio.com. So, collapse upon yourself, slump back, and try to hear our words as you fade in and out of consciousness.
Wow. That was a bit...
that was my cheerful...
That was a bit dark.
I've been watching a series of unfortunate events by any chance. You've got that narrator's voice.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our showgram.
Hello.
Russell, welcome back.
Oh, I've missed you guys.
You were out for a while.
Yes.
Okay, then.
What up?
How's everybody been the last couple of weeks?
Just fine.
Feeling a little bit happier, are we?
A little bit.
Things in the country are a little bit
different.
There's a little bit of a different direction going on now. One might begin to feel a little sense of hope, but we're not here to talk about that. Anything special we want to report before going straight into stuff?
I got nothing.
Russell, you got anything?
What?
You went on a trip. That's why you weren't here. How did that go?
I did, actually. I went to an engineering summit with my company and spent a couple of days learning about cool things like what Google is doing with AI and stuff like that.
Neat.
Then I gave a talk at UC Riverside, which had a lot of stuff about fake news in it, and it went very well. It happened that I gave the talk the day after Kellyanne Conway mentioned the Bowling Green massacre, so I had to scramble to update my slides.
Of course.
Everybody, I hope, listening to us was marked safe during that.
Yes.
Yeah.
During that disaster.
Hopefully.
Okay. Well, Russell, you weren't here last time, but you might have heard that we had a little discussion about punching Nazis.
I've heard indirectly. Normally I would have listened, but...
Because there was a thing in the news. What's his name? Richard Spencer.
Yes.
White supremacist guy got punched, and then he got punched again, and it was all over the news. And then Milo Yiannopoulos
Yiannopoulos,
or
right.
whatever, as there was a protest about his appearance at a university, and
Also,
so
incidentally,
the social media was all full of arguments about how appropriate is it for people to use force against awful viewpoints.
yes.
And you were saying?
As a side note, I was informed the room I gave a talk in had just been repainted because somebody had tagged a swastika on the wall.
Wow.
And did they paint that swastika over? Because that's free speech.
That's not how the administration probably saw it.
Yeah. So that's exactly the kind of murky territory we got into last episode.
Yeah.
Private citizens can paint over whatever they want.
I
Usually also punch whatever they want.
it's a little weird because
Well-
2 weeks ago when we did the show,
consequences.
I'm sorry, Dennis. What?
Go ahead. I'm bad.
I was interrupting you. 2 weeks ago when we did the show, I was kind of dreading doing the show because we were in the depths of the worst of what was happening
The dark times.
in our nation. And we had not yet seen a few cracks and shafts of light beginning to appear, and so it was much easier then for me to contemplate the possibility that we were in an extreme enough situation that maybe normal rules of behavior were no longer enough, and that we needed to consider fighting back. This right now, I still intellectually feel that the position that I took was valid, but it seems a bit more academic. I do not at this moment think that fists need to be ready to fly at this moment. But it's still a subject, right?
Yeah.
The whole question of, where is the line is a valid question. And we got some letters
Very much,
about it.
yeah.
We got some letters about it. And then, we don't want to just blow off our listeners when they respond to things we talked about, because else what is the point? What is the damn point of this show? I did read last episode a short essay by philosopher Karl Popper, which basically talks about what he calls the paradox of tolerance, which says if you tolerate everything, you're going to wind up tolerating things, people, attitudes that are intolerant.
Yeah.
And just giving them free rein to say and do what they say. Let's just say what they want. And that therefore you run the risk of their ideas spreading. And if your own speech is not enough to stop them, they're just going to take over. And then your tolerant society is gone. Your tolerant society is finished, right? And that's the thing. That's the question about this line. I feel we're farther back away from that line now than I thought we were 2 weeks ago. But it's still an issue.
But
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
non-religious values are principles and not hard rules like thou shalt not ever punch anybody. And I feel like, the circumstances around a particular action have a lot of influence over whether that action is a good thing or not. And so people who go around saying, oh, if we punch people, then we're exactly as bad as they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe
depends.
discounting a whole lot of context.
It can actually matter why the punching was going on.
Right. Yeah.
It can actually matter. Now, this is complicated. The whole thing is complicated by the fact that there are laws on the books that say a certain thing.
Oh,
and those
sure.
laws were written to maintain a certain kind of stability.
A civil society of some sort.
Right. And that's great, right?
Yeah.
But it is not true that whenever you break the law, you are in the wrong. That is just not always true.
That's right.
So there's that. Anyway, so enough about this. Let's hear from our listeners. Kieran from Auckland, New Zealand writes, I listened with some disgust to your discussion about the paradox of tolerance. Karl Popper has an interesting and valid point in his writing. Giving too much tolerance might give the enemies of tolerance the rope with which to hang us. It's worthy of discussion. What Popper is not advocating for, from what I can glean, however, is vigilantism. And I want to jump in and say Kieran is absolutely right. What Popper actually argues for in his essay is not that everybody should put up their dukes and go at it. In fact, he spends some time pointing out this is a last resort. But when it comes down to it, what he thinks ought to happen, and this leads to whole other discussions, right? What Popper thinks ought to happen is that intolerant speech should be criminalized at some level to some degree.
Some level, yeah.
Yes. And there's a whole discussion to have there, right? And let's not grab that and run off a cliff with it thinking, well, therefore he's asking for something crazy. There might be a way to implement that in a way that's workable.
Yeah, well, I already have something called hate speech.
However,
now, so, yeah.
however, as soon the point of the article and the we got into that too, Russell. I mean, I have long been troubled by the idea of hate speech legislation that is laid on top of certain crimes to make them worse, and always stuck to the opinion that you should be punished for what you did, and that's all that matters.
Well,
and I am backing away from that now and looking at it again.
yeah, I mean, as this is about punching Nazis,
Sure.
It's easy to, or it's maybe more acceptable to invoke Godwin's law. And
I think it's important, by the way, to not use the word Nazi in this discussion.
Okay.
I absolutely think it's appropriate to use the word Nazi for people who are fucking Nazis.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Whether they are willing to admit that they are or not. I think that's appropriate. But we're talking about a principle. And the principle is not about Nazis.
Yeah, okay.
The principle is about intolerance.
Right.
And there's different kinds of intolerance than just Nazi intolerance.
Okay.
Oh, you think so? Do you think there might be religious intolerance?
There might indeed be, which would make it a lot more appropriate to talk about on this show.
But to run with that extreme, I mean, part of what happened with the Nazis was that they focused a lot on Jews.
Yeah.
And a few other groups.
Yeah. Well, they started somewhere.
Right. But I think, I actually happen to be listening to a fictional book that is set in World War II or pre-World War II Germany. And, a lot of historians around that time have spent a lot of time thinking about why average normal Germans went along with the Nazis. And, it seems to me that if you have a target group that is acceptable targets, it makes it much easier to drift into, between just conceptual words about how all of Group X are criminals and people
Right.
jumping to act on it. And so maybe there should be a lower threshold on people who are considered the acceptable targets of the day, on crimes committed against them.
Yeah.
Because leaving that unchecked spirals out of control more quickly for them.
Right.
Right. But that is also the huge risk that those of us who consider ourselves tolerant face when we notice some group that is frightening us, and then start having these discussions about, well, where's the line and how much of that do we have to take before we put up our dukes, right? Because that really is a thing that not just bigoted people, all people, when faced with existential threat, start thinking about, how far can we go, right?
Yeah.
So to me, the difference is not the people who will not fight versus the people who will. The difference is in what those people are willing to fight for.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be on a side that's really right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that will come up in some of these letters. I want to keep going with Kieran's letter here.
All right.
He's making a very thoughtful, disgusted response.
Yes.
Well, Karl Popper is not advocating for vigilantism. That's absolutely right. Nothing excuses a private individual assaulting another citizen because of their opinion. Well, and I'll read the next sentence. That power rests solely on the state. And I could poke a little fun at Kieran here because the state also doesn't have the right to assault citizens because of their opinions. Actually, you just mean the right to use force rests on the state, right?
Right.
Not because
I
know that's not
that's
what
what
Kieran
you mean.
means.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about the law, and we're talking about right and wrong, which is not exactly the same thing. Obviously, what we all want is for the laws to allow things that are right and disallow things that are wrong, but that is not always the case.
Right.
And
People are sneakier than
and
that.
laws change, and there are things that we might like the law to handle differently than it does. And that does not make the people who want the law to be different wrong, necessarily. Kieran goes on. Any discussion on this subject either starts with a complete condemnation of this vigilante animal's actions, or I have a serious disagreement and concern. Well,
I'm sorry. You have a serious disagreement and concern because you can't just jump to the absolute statement that, you can, but I'm going to say
if you
you're
do,
wrong.
we have a disagreement with you, Kieran. And in my case, you're talking to a guy who, back in '79 when I was high school, co-wrote a superhero role-playing game called Villains and Vigilantes. And the Vigilantes is superheroes, okay? I do not think that right and wrong and the law are the same thing. And if you do, I would ask you to take a step back away from that and think about it. I will be reading something into the record a little bit later that will directly address that. He goes on, it should be noted that the religious could easily make a similar argument. Tolerating intolerance to faith will eventually see the end of faith. If we can't counter atheists with Bible verses and apologetics because they are so closed-minded and universities have been taken over by atheists, then we should claim in the name of faith the right not to tolerate those who are intolerant of faith. And this gets right back to what I said earlier, that it's not about who's willing to fight. It's about what are you willing to fight for. And there are going to be people out there who think they are right about a thing they are wrong about.
Oh, yeah.
That is absolutely going to happen. I mean, you could take anything and take the structure of that rule and put it in the hands of people who are wrong, and they will misuse it. There's nothing special about this question that makes it especially prone to being abused by people who are coming from an invalid direction.
Right.
Right? So it seems to me, Kieran, unless you're willing to argue that theists could make a similar argument like you described and be right, like somehow them making that argument would magically give them justification for their belief in their invisible friend and his rules, right? I think this is a non sequitur. Because it's not a question of the structure of the rule. It's a question of is that rule being applied on the basis of an accurate
Right.
viewpoint, or is it being misused by people who are full of shit?
Yeah, but the thing is, unless you go for an absolute disallowing of violence, then whether they're right or wrong is irrelevant because they can convince themselves they're right
Right.
and use their violence, and
Right. It's
all the
not as
arguments
if-
in the world isn't going to
It's not
fix
as
it.
if it's not as if tolerant people being fed up and swinging their fists, right, is a necessary component to fascists deciding to do something bad. Fascists already want to do something bad. It's not you're thinking that somehow they're waiting for us to justify them. They don't.
Oh, yeah,
they never
not.
waited for us to justify them. They already exist.
That's true.
And they are already making their
Prepared to
arguments
use violence.
and already saying, yeah, that it's look how it worked in Nazi Germany. It was not really from day one a violent takeover of their government. It was about an incremental takeover of their government and people not stopping them soon enough.
Right. I've got a more current example, which is the anti-abortion movement
Right.
in modern times. Like, by and large, a lot of anti-abortionists are constantly using sort of extreme speech, calling women and doctors murderers all the time. But then,
Well, they have that absolutist mindset.
right. But
They're
then willing to
absolutely
say,
correct.
well, that's just my opinion and it's free speech. But in like numerous cases, enough to call a pattern, people who were fed a steady diet of that kind of talk took it into their own hands to do something about
Right.
these people that they considered murderers. And so, the question is, do we actually, like, when somebody is showing extremist tendencies and a capacity for violence, do we have to wait until they've actually killed somebody to take some kind of action against them?
Yeah. Ultimately, yes. This ultimately comes down to the question of where is the line, and if you take the
Right.
position, Kieran, that there is no line, that under no circumstances is it appropriate, then I think you are just wrong. If suppose, right, and this is Karl Popper's concern, right? Suppose that the purveyors of intolerance are able to seize control of the lawmaking bodies of our nations.
Well, that's a wild speculation, but proceed.
Suppose they're able to do that despite all of our verbal
Arguments.
arguments against what they're doing. Does that mean, this is the question, does that mean we have to throw up our hands and say, well, they won fair and square, they get to be in charge now? Because unless that's what you mean, there is a point at which it becomes okay to say, argument isn't working, this needs to be stopped. Or else it's not stopped, and then you have a big war, and we've seen how that went last time.
Right.
So it's not. I am don't get me wrong. I am so totally in favor of people arguing for free speech, right?
Yeah.
For tolerance, including not taking swings at people who say stuff we don't like, right? I am totally in favor of all of that under normal circumstances. And now we get back to the point where 2 weeks ago I was feeling much more on that we were much more closer to the edge of it being a desperately extreme situation.
Balanced on our
maybe
tiptoes,
we're not
our
there
arms
now.
flailing wildly.
Maybe we are not there now, and maybe this is just an academic discussion. But let's have the academic discussion.
Yeah.
Right? I would love to believe that the crisis has now passed, that we're past a tipping point, and that the apparently
Hope so.
yeah, we don't actually know that yet,
Right.
but I'm feeling hopeful in a way that I wasn't 2 weeks ago, right? I'd love to believe that, and that we can all go back to the normal business of
Arguing with words.
arguing with words. But if we're not, if 20 years from now we're in another crisis situation, I'd like us to have actually addressed this this academic question that we're talking about now, right? There's got to be a point at which we say, all right, we tried talking. We are the people who know that a tolerant society is better, right?
Mm-hmm.
We believe that a tolerant society is better, and that is our justification for fighting for it.
Right. Now the people we're fighting against are gonna think that their intolerant society is the answer to everything.
They already think
They
that.
already think that.
And they may point at us and say, "Look, that tolerant person swung his fist. So isn't he
Intolerant?
Isn't he, in fact, being hypocritical?"
Right.
Well, no, he's not, and we'll get to more of that later. Anyway, let me finish Kieran's letter. Perhaps it's not a great idea for those of us that hold a minority view to be quite so quick to see violence as a valid response to our ideas losing ground. Well, I think we just addressed that. If we are in fact a minority view, then we're screwed. And if we're screwed, do we want to go down swinging, or do we want to just throw up our hands and say, well, they got the votes, therefore now we'll do like Richard Spencer is on record saying he wants, and we'll ship all black people back to Africa. Right?
Right.
I do not agree. I do not agree that if words are not enough, then we have to sit idly by and let that happen. Don't agree.
Let injustice
and
just
if
run
you
rampant.
have a serious disagreement with that, Kieran, then I'm sorry, that's not going to be resolvable, because I'm not moving from that position. And he ends, not to mention that I think a big part of this is the tendency among many now to label everyone who disagrees with them a Nazi, making the Nazi problem appear erroneously larger and scarier than it actually is. Well, I agree that nobody who is not a Nazi should be called a Nazi.
Right.
But I think it is entirely valid to call a person a Nazi if they are, I don't know, let's say 80% a Nazi by comparison with actual historical Nazis, right? Richard Spencer's not on record saying he wants black people rounded up and put in ovens. He's not there, right? But he wants black people rounded up and shipped back to Africa from the United States. I'm going Nazi, and I am not out of line doing this. That is, and furthermore, the actual Nazi regime did not come out and say what we really want is to round up all Jewish people and burn them in ovens. They did not actually say that. They said, "Oh, we're just going to resettle them."
Right. We're going to solve the problem.
Yeah,
We have a solution.
that's what they said. So while it is true that people using the N word, if we have to refer to it that way, to call people Nazis when they aren't. While that is potentially a problem, the risk of not identifying people who are fucking Nazis soon enough is a much bigger problem.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget that a lot of groups like Stormfront, self-identify as neo-Nazis. And let's not forget that, like what I said earlier, which is that I was at a college in California, which is generally, not known for that sort of thing, and somebody painted a swastika on the wall. Now, I can't say, who's to say that it wasn't somebody
Youthful
doing
hijinks.
doing an ironic joke. But my perception is that kind of thing, doing it as a kidding, not kidding kind of thing, is on the rise.
Yeah, let's add that too, Kieran. You are writing to us from New Zealand. I don't know what's going on in New Zealand, but we can tell you what's going on here in the United States, okay? It's possible that the Nazi problem here is slightly smaller than it seems to be because of the reason that you cite, of people just being too eager to say Nazi.
Sure.
But slightly smaller is not enough to justify turning a blind eye to it. All right. So anyway, thank you, Kieran. You did write a thoughtful letter in spite of your disgust, and we appreciate that. But there we go. I really want to finish this topic before we move on to news. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because we have more on it. Craig from Sydney, Australia. Why is it?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I just noticed all of our responses to the that I brought in, because we did get more mail on this. We can't read everything. All the stuff I brought in is from Australia and New Zealand.
That's where all the thoughtful people are.
Hey, what's good? Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that.
What?
I mean, not about the last letter.
You guys, anyway. You people in Australia were able to implement like a gun ban, which is something we can't do here, despite the desperate need for it. Anyway, Craig from Sydney, Australia writes, I find Karl Popper's view on not allowing intolerance to succeed if we want to live in a tolerant society convincing on the surface. However, when it comes to the point where words are no longer enough and things need to get physical, who decides who is tolerant enough to justify these actions? This is another way of asking Kieran's question earlier, right? Or he's addressing the same point that Kieran raised, which is, well, if you say that it's okay to punch the bad people, then we'll have bad people saying it's okay to punch the people they think are bad people.
And again, they'll say that anyway.
Yeah, there is that. Russell's point is extremely well taken, that it's not like they are going to wait for us to make a misstep before they go ahead and act on the views that they have. Yeah. That they are already more or less upfront about, right? And to the extent that their views may be worse and they're just not talking about it yet, right? Like Spencer saying, ship the black people back to Africa instead of killing them all.
Right.
To that extent, I just don't think we want to be overly cautious. But also, I think there is an excellent answer to this question of who decides. And for that, I am going to read another short essay on this subject from, not from Karl Popper this time, but a fellow named Jonathan Zunger. He is a engineer at Google, works on their social products. So he's not a philosopher. And let's understand who it is that's talking here. He wrote an essay called "Tolerance is Not a Moral Precept," and I will read it. The title of this essay should disturb you. We've been brought up to believe that tolerating other people is one of the things you do if you're a nice person. Whether we learned this in kindergarten or from biblical maxims like love your neighbor as yourself and do unto others. But if you have ever tried to live your life this way, you will have seen it fail. Quote, why won't you tolerate my intolerance? This comes in all sorts of forms. Accepting a person's actively antisocial behavior because it's just part of being in an accepting group of friends. Being told that prejudice against Nazis is the same as prejudice against black people. Watching people try to give equal time to a religious or irreligious group whose guiding principle is that everyone must join them or else. Every one of these examples should raise your suspicions that something isn't right, that tolerance be damned, one of these things is not like the other. But if you were raised with an intense version of tolerance is a moral requirement, then you may feel that this is a thought you should fight off. It isn't. Tolerance is not a moral absolute. It is a peace treaty. Tolerance is a social norm because it allows different people to live side by side without being at each other's throats. It means that we accept that people may be different from us in their customs, in their behavior, in their dress, in their sex lives, and that if this doesn't directly affect our lives, it is none of our business. But the model of a peace treaty differs from the model of a moral precept in one simple way. The protection of a peace treaty only extends to those willing to abide by its terms. It is an agreement to live in peace, not an agreement to be peaceful no matter the conduct of others. A peace treaty is not a suicide pact. Tolerance is an agreement to live in peace. Oh, excuse me. This is the part of the article where there was one of those little snippets taken out and stuck in, and
right.
I forgot to edit it out. When viewed through this lens, the problems above have clear answers. The antisocial member of the group who harms other people in the group on a regular basis need not be accepted. The purpose of the group's acceptance is to let people feel that they have a home, and someone who actively tries to thwart this is incompatible with the broader purpose of that acceptance. Prejudice against Nazis is not the same as prejudice against black people because one is based on the person's stated opposition to their neighbors' lives and safety, and the other is a characteristic that has nothing to do with whether they'll live in peace with you or not. Freedom of religion means that people have the right to have their own beliefs, but you have that same right. You are under no obligation to tolerate an attempt to impose someone else's religious laws on you. This is the thing that what's his name? With the wafers thrown out of the trash can. Who's that guy? Is he still around?
P.Z. Myers?
P.Z. Myers.
Yeah, he's still around.
Tried to teach us this lesson years ago. This is a variation on the old saw that your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. We often forget or ignore that no right is absolute because one person's rights can conflict with another's. This is why freedom of speech doesn't protect extortion and the right to bear arms doesn't license armed robbery. Nor is this limited to rights involving the state. People can interfere with each other's rights with no government involvement, as when people use harassment to suppress other people's speech. While both sides of that example say they are exercising their free speech, one of them is using their speech to prevent the others. These are not equivalent. The balance of rights has the structure of a peace treaty. It's interesting there because I think he might be against the protest against Yiannopoulos, but that's fine. He's not getting at the question of what the speaker represents.
Right.
Unlike absolute moral precepts, treaties have remedies for breach. If one side has breached another's rights, the injured party is no longer bound to respect the treaty rights of their assailant, and their response is not an identical violation of the rules, even if it looks superficially similar to the original breach. Mommy, mommy, Timmy hit me back holds no more ethical weight among adults than it does among children. After a breach, the moral rules which apply are not the rules of peace, but the rules of broken peace and the rules of war. We might ask, is the response proportional? Is it necessary? Does it serve the larger purpose of restoring the peace? Those are all fair questions, but we do not take an invaded country to task for defending its borders.
Right.
All right. So to get back to the question of who decides, on the basis of that writer's essay, the intolerant person decides. By choosing to be intolerant within a tolerant society, they are breaking the treaty and saying those rules no longer apply, which means those new rules no longer apply to them.
Right. They have abrogated the treaty.
So it's not like you can't take that viewpoint and say, well, I hate people that chew bubble gum. So therefore, I'm going to go around punching people that chew bubble gum. There's no agreement that the person is violating when they chew their gum. They have the right to chew their gum, and them chewing it doesn't make you have to, and it's not breaking any rules, right? You can't. That is a non-starter. But if the rule is we're all going to tolerate each other, and a person under those rules goes ahead and expresses their intolerant views, they are saying, I am outside of that agreement now. And they then have no business demanding to be tolerated.
Right. Yeah.
So,
not a bad essay.
Back to Craig.
There's a certain amount of as with many things that not consensus. What's the word I'm looking for?
Describe.
Two people interacting.
Yeah.
There has to be an agreement between them.
Not consensus?
Not consensus. Consensus is the word, but it wasn't the word I was looking for.
Just say agreement.
It's commonly used in people describing what constitutes rape and what doesn't.
Consent?
Consent. There's a certain amount of the issue of consent in this thing.
Yeah.
We consent to agree by this peace treaty unless someone breaks it.
Right. Right.
Well,
and the punched white supremacist is the first to jump up and scream, look, this so-called tolerant person who punched me is being hypocritical. Well, no, excuse me. You, the white supremacist, are hypocritical in demanding tolerance when you are no longer willing to extend tolerance to others.
Right.
Let me try for an analogy. So if you're playing a game with somebody, let's say Monopoly, and the normal rules of Monopoly are that you roll 2 6-sided dice on your turn, but you're playing with somebody who smuggled in a pair of 20-sided dice. And so this person has, I'm not sure if that's an advantage or not, but let's say it in Monopoly. But
let's just say it.
So this guy
Monopoly's not a race. That actually wouldn't help. But go ahead.
No, but
not important.
You
to
know
the
what
point.
I'm getting at. This person is systematically cheating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, as retaliation, you do some sort of small rules violation to try to catch up. You're also cheating, but then let's say that guy calls you out on the cheating and demands harsh punishment for you, then goes on cheating like a lot.
Right.
Right.
It's fair to say that cheating is a problem in the game, but it's also a problem if the rules are applied unequally.
Yeah, let me just recast your example a little bit because I
Okay.
think it's a really good one, right?
Yeah, it's a start.
So you cheat, right, at Monopoly, and I say stop cheating at Monopoly, and you say no,
Right.
right? And then I say, okay, well then I'm going to cheat too, and then you say, see how hypocritical you are, you're cheating now.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. All right.
Like your complaint has not stopped me from cheating.
Right.
And so are you going to come up with some sort of defense, or are you just going to sit there going, oh, well, I guess I'll just finish out this game under these rules that apparently you're allowed to cheat and I'm not?
Yeah. All right. Let me go on with Craig's letter. So he asked who decides who's tolerant enough to justify the actions. It's an agreement. They violated the agreement. The agreement no longer limits our actions against them.
Right.
When would this apply to the two most intolerant organizations I can think of, namely the Christian and Islamic religious organizations? In the sense that there must exist a member of the KKK who has horrible views but hasn't yet nor immediately plans to hurt anyone, could the same not be said of a potential terrorist? Okay, he brought up Christianity and Islam, but then jumped to the KKK. It is, as long as we're living in a tolerant society, as long as Christians and Muslims within our society tolerate our choice not to be members of their organizations, all is well.
Right.
And we should, and as long as we tolerate their right to be Christians and Muslims, all is well. The moment one or a religious organization starts saying the kind of shit that a lot of them do, right? Which is, you're not a good person unless you're a member of our organization. You shouldn't be allowed to hold public office if you're not a member of our organization, right?
Right.
As soon as they stop being tolerant, the gloves are off. They have broken the agreement, and now we do not need to tolerate them. That would be how it works.
Yeah.
And then in the sense of this KKK guy who has horrible views but hasn't hurt anyone, could the same not be said of a potential terrorist? Well, we've gone suddenly from organizations to individuals. And the point of what Karl Popper was saying was that there is a threat to the entire society from large groups of organized intolerant people. That would certainly apply potentially to, like Christian, what do they call them? Dominionists who want to take over the country and impose biblical law on everyone, Christian or not, right? That would be the kind of threat we're talking about. Nobody is suggesting that lone individuals pose that kind of threat. And for the most part, I'm perfectly okay with the existing rules. I mean, they as individuals have still broken the treaty, right? But when we have a complete law enforcement organizations that can deal with them, that's fine. They can deal with them. So it's hard to see how that would be necessary. Okay, so back on subject. If punching a Nazi who hasn't committed any violence is okay, as it may prevent him from spreading views that encourage or condone acts of violence, how is this different from taking preemptive steps to stop mullahs from spreading hatred and violence? Well, I kind of think this is a really difficult problem because I think the problem with, say, Islam is that Islam comes in different flavors, right? There are moderate and liberal Muslims. There totally are. Not every Muslim thinks that that everybody who's not a Muslim is the enemy, or that their religious laws ought to be imposed on everybody in the nation. Not every Muslim is like that. In fact, it's a relatively small number of them.
Not every Muslim is
at least
ISIL.
in the United States, which is where
United
we're
States,
talking,
sure.
right? And I don't know about Australia, but as far as I know, there's not like a big threat of Australia being taken over by Sharia law right now. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay. So the problem that we're dealing with is a lot of people not caring about that distinction, right? Now, it's the same thing that goes on in Christianity. There are a lot of liberal and moderate Christians who are not trying to take over the country and make it a theocracy. They're just not.
Right.
That doesn't stop me from debating with them
Right.
about the validity of their views. But it does
Because
mean
make no mistake,
I do not have
we
to
all think that they are wrong in their specific
right.
opinions
but
about
I
supernatural.
actually have something else I need to say about that in a moment.
Yeah.
Right? That's okay, but that's not what we're talking about, right? A dominionist who literally wants me put to death for not being a Christian, that guy deserves a punch. I'm sorry, he just fucking does. All right, so let's be careful about gotcha questions that take advantage of a real problem we're facing with people who don't care about the distinctions between dangerous religionists and not dangerous religionists, and try to apply them to folks like those of us on the show who do make that distinction. All right. However, I have to say, I have recently posted something on Facebook to the effect that I'm thinking about pulling back on my eagerness to engage liberal and moderate Christians on, or any kind of theists, on the ridiculousness of their beliefs if they are on my side of the political spectrum right now. Okay? This would be a tactical move.
Right. Need
Right.
all the allies you can.
Yeah. And I got called, this is crazy, I got called a psychopath. No, psychopath? Is that what? For
Sociopath?
Sociopath. Yeah, sociopath.
Oh, wow.
I got called a
Really?
sociopath for being willing to work with people I disagree with, just because it's to my
Wow.
tactical advantage.
That's like the opposite
crazy.
of sociopathy. I mean,
I know.
the thing is,
It was crazy.
sociopathy means like basically not like lacking in the ability to empathize with or understand how people
I know.
think.
I don't even
Right.
know. I cannot
that's
figure out
crazy.
what this guy's problem is. I mean, I've gone
Yeah.
to his Facebook page to look up what his deal is, and he seems like just a regular guy. He's not a crazy religionist or anything. I don't know what exactly it is that ticked him off, but he was having none of that.
But I mean, being able to ally with people and deal with some things that are different because you like understand the social advantage of having allies.
Yeah.
That's
I don't-
not sociopathy.
And don't get me wrong, I hate the concept of having to bite my tongue and not necessarily drive away every Christian of every kind who might be an ally. Because I, 6 months ago, we were living in a universe where that was a major issue, right? Where just day-to-day liberal and moderate Christianity was a problem worthy of my attention.
Right.
Just thinking it's not that, it is not as big a deal as some other things, which makes it hard to do this show, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the line I'm drawing is on the show, I'll speak my piece, but face to face, I'm considering being a little
accommodating.
a little. I'll just hold back a little bit on telling them what I think about their invisible friend. Okay, so anyway, back to Craig's letter. I think the problem with this type of thinking is the type of people that punch Richard Spencer are the same people that can be seen pepper spraying Trump supporters and hitting an unconscious man with a flagpole during the recent UC Berkeley riot.
Oh.
You know what? You noticed the eagerness with which some people on the conservative end of the political spectrum have been accusing those who speak out against them of having been paid.
Yeah.
I have no proof to back this up, right? But my experience is that people who are so eager to believe that that kind of thing is going on tend to be the kind of people to whom it would occur to make that sort of thing go on. And there are accusations flying about that many of these violent protesters were, in fact, paid muckrakers put in there to make the protest as a whole look bad. I have no evidence about this either way, so, I'm not making a claim that I know, because I don't. I do think the time to make definitive statements about the people pepper spraying or hitting people with flagpoles or whatever is after they are apprehended and identified and we know what their deal was, and not before. Is that fair? I hope that's fair. But that puts me in an awkward position, right? Because I'm arguing that willingness to resort to force against intolerant views is okay at a certain level,
Right.
So,
Well, who's violated the pact? Who's violated the
we don't
treaty
know
in these
because these people, to the best of my knowledge, none of these people were apprehended and identified. So, I don't know. Craig goes on, and that I'm gonna claim we have a draw there, Craig, because while the issue you raised certainly is problematic, I just don't think that we know what was actually going on there. Craig goes on. I think people like this and the recent Quebec mosque shooter try to take the moral high ground that their violence is justified as it prevents future violence. And again, I'll respond to that the way I responded to Kieran. This is not about the bare structure of the rules. It is about who is actually fighting for a thing that is good, right? Murdering Muslims is not fighting for a thing that is good. If you don't, if those Muslims are not, actively engaged in hurting others either now or in the future, right? I guess I get it is absolutely right to be cautious about resorting to violence, right?
Yeah.
But you know why we all know that it's right to be cautious about resorting to violence? Because we're the good guys.
But everybody thinks they're the good guys.
If everybody thinks we're the good guys, but those of us who actually are the good guys aren't willing to act because we're afraid that acting on our convictions will make us bad guys, guess who's going to win?
Right.
That will be the bad guys who think they're good guys. because they will not be hesitant to act on their convictions.
But all sides are thinking the same way.
You know,
Yeah.
I'll bring up my superhero role playing game again, right? I mean, for 40 years I've had to deal with this question in my head. You know, is flying around in capes and tights punching crooks, right? How is that morally justified at any level? The thing is, the moment you got a guy in a superhero story who's in capes and tights running around punching people who are not
endangering anyone,
not even in the future, right? They're not planning on endangering others. They don't have to. You have to be in the right.
right?
Or doing that is wrong.
I mean,
and it doesn't matter that you're doing something superficially similar. Your justification matters.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why the Watchmen comic is so good and interesting. I mean, because this is a bunch of people in a world that's mostly without superpowered people, right? And
it's all without except for
Dr. Manhattan.
Dr. Manhattan. Yeah.
But mostly it's just a bunch of people going around saying, it would be really cool to run around and put on a costume and go fight people. But they're all just mostly normal people, and a lot of them are really morally gray. They don't have the right intentions. Some of them. I mean, there's some characters on the right side, and there's also Rorschach, who's kind of toward the darker end, and
he's actually this is Alan Moore, who Rorschach is like a
satire of.
I don't know how much it's a satire. I think he comes across to me as an honest effort by Alan Moore to find something heroic in conservatism.
But I mean, I've also heard that he's deliberately satirizing like a libertarian character, like an Ayn Randian superhero made by
but Rorschach is not.
Was it Frank Miller?
Hugely more Alan Moore.
No. I mean the guy who made the thing that was being satirized.
Oh, I'm not sure. Anyway,
Steve.
Yeah,
Steve
totally
Ditko. Sorry,
Steve Ditko.
Yeah, Steve Ditko had a superhero called Mr. A.
Yeah,
which is based on Ayn Rand's obsession with the "A is A" line.
Wow. Okay. All right.
I don't know.
Wow.
Check it out on Wikipedia.
I was not even aware of that. Anyway, so what was I talking about?
Where were we?
Superheroes,
Trying
right?
To justify superheroes.
I think that that where maybe there is a disconnect in these discussions is between thinking of rules of behavior rather than principles, which Russell brought up right up front, which is well taken. Mm-hmm. That rules are structures that then you think, well, if that rule works for person A, then it should also work for person B. Principles need like justifications and also have limits, and it's much softer edged, but also therefore a lot more useful in the messy real world. But you've got to be careful.
Right.
So anyway, that is our 2 negative letters. Now we got one positive letter, which I will read some of. Elaine.
By the way, we're an hour in, and I'm just going to declare my intention not to do a shit internet apologist say today, because I mean I don't have anything great.
Everybody's
anyway.
Gonna blame me. I'm gonna get hate
Go
mail.
ahead, send him your hate.
Don't. No, I just complained.
No. I wasn't really all that keen on anything I had today, so don't blame Jeff.
And I want to preface Elaine's letter. Elaine is the positive letter that I brought. Mm-hmm. It's not the only one. I won't preface it. I'll just point by point as it goes. Elaine from New Zealand writes, I really heavily agree with Jeff on the fact that the question needs to be asked, when is the law not enough? I think that to come to an informed conclusion on the matter, you have to look at what it is that these people are actually doing, both now and historically, and how they go about it. When they know enough to be able to manipulate and abuse the letter of the law to get away with metaphorical and sometimes literal murder, it is up to decent society to take a stand. Take Milo, whatever the fuck, you know who I mean. He's another white supremacist, and there was recently a protest at a university that caused the school's facilities to deny his podium. A little reported fact about this whole event is that in a prior speaking engagement at a different university, one of the people he radicalized shot someone. Does anybody know anything about this?
I heard something about that.
What I have heard about this guy is that he identifies individual students by name.
She's about to get on to that.
Yeah, okay.
I had not heard about the...
I didn't hear about the shooting. I'll look it up if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's tough for me as the guy who's saying, speaking academically, there is a point at which it's okay to use violence against intolerant people, right? I am totally running the risk of somebody hauling off and doing that and then saying, well, Jeff D said it was okay.
Yeah.
Right? So it's hard for me to, at this point, to confront the idea that a conservative right-wing guy might have motivated somebody to use violence, right? Because it's going to always come back to our justifications, right? What kind of a world am I arguing that is worth fighting for? And what kind of world is this guy arguing that it's worth fighting for?
By the way,
anyway,
yes,
a
guy was totally shot
Yeah.
who was tweeting at Milo about what a fan he was. This was on January 23rd. I mean, the shooter was a big fan.
Okay. Not only this, but he actively caused enough discrimination and hate toward a transgender student at that university to the point where that individual had to leave. This behavior was scheduled to continue at the rally that he had to cancel. It was later revealed after the protest that he had planned on naming illegals within the university in an effort to target them in much the same manner. How much responsibility does the one who is actively encouraging these kinds of actions through veiled and not so veiled words have? Because if I'm being honest here, I'd love to sock that guy in the face, especially when he is facing no legal repercussions for his actions, for his words.
Yeah.
At what point have these people reached enough historic karma for their viewpoints that their words should no longer be treated as just opinions? When is enough enough? The stakes right now are high and personal for many minorities. The literal, actual Nazis used code words and dog whistles for their genocidal acts and aspirations. We're letting neo-Nazis get away with the same candy-coated white supremacy because there's this idea that all speech is equal and that speech in and of itself cannot be violence. I would argue that to espouse, spread, and promote racialist views is itself an act of violence.
I think that's well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like justifying actions on the basis of metaphors like that. So it's metaphorically violence, and it certainly, I think, has a danger of leading to actual violence. That's the problem. But I would just rather we use words for what is actually going on.
Right.
Well,
apparently what's actually going on is incitement.
Incitement, yeah. Which is actually, in fact, against the law. Incitement, if you can prove it. All right. So anyway, I think we can dispense with this issue now, having delved really, really deep in the academic discussion. I do feel better about the universe than I did 2 weeks ago, and about my nation than I did 2 weeks ago. But of course, we'll have to see where it goes.
Yes, and I do like the peace treaty. Is that a metaphor? What is that? Is that an analogy?
That is an actual
it's
description
actually what
of
it
what
is.
the structure of it is.
Right. Well, it's a structure of tolerance is a peace treaty. Right.
Right. Now, what's scary about that, and he just didn't. The article, by the way, goes on. I ended at the point where he had made all the points,
the salient points
that I think we needed to address here. But his article goes on longer. It's called "Tolerance is Not a Moral Precept."
Right.
And if you search for that, you can read the whole thing. And there is a response section at the end where people raise issues about what they think are the limitations and errors in what he's saying, and that's totally worth listening to those people.
Yeah.
What bothers me about it, I'll tell you this, is that the unstated assumption is that without that treaty, the assumption is it's everybody at each other's throats.
Yeah.
And
so the treaty's necessary.
I think that's well.
In that case,
we don't have an explicit actual treaty.
Right.
We didn't
right.
all sign a piece of paper, right? So it's this weird kind of agreement that is unstated, and that it's fair to question who has agreed to be party to that and who hasn't, and what it means not to be. But in general, I think his essay makes a great counterpoint to and a great companion piece to the Karl Popper thing.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to do your thing?
I've got some news.
Do some news. Okay, let's do some news.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for putting up with that again. I do think we're hopefully done with that topic. We don't let these things go on forever. But this is only twice.
Not necessarily any news that will make you feel better.
Oh, great. Yeah, we can't really even talk about the stuff that's just happened that makes me feel better because it's not relevant to atheism exactly.
Talking about a certain person being stepping down.
Certain things that don't really directly have anything to do with religion.
No, but we're happy about them anyway as individuals. But
that could be anything.
Yeah. I mean, so I like to keep focusing on stories like this to remind people who, like, for instance, Sam Harris are like, well, maybe there's a little bit of a silver lining in that we don't, Trump isn't always overtly religious, so maybe he's secretly an atheist. And my answer to that has always been, A, there's no real evidence of that, and B, who cares when he does stuff like this?
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Evangelical Jerry Falwell Jr. to head Trump Education Task Force, according to Ian Simpson of Religion News.
Now, how does this task force? What does this task force have to do with Betsy DeVos?
With Betsy DeVos?
Yeah.
I don't know if it does directly.
Isn't she Department of Education?
Betsy DeVos is now, leading the Department
So what does
of
this task
Education.
force have to do with the Department of Education?
I haven't even read the story
All right.
yet.
Sorry. Well, that's okay.
I don't know the answer. Evangelical Christian leader Jerry Falwell Jr. will head an education reform task force under U.S. President Donald Trump and is keen to cut university regulations, including rules on dealing with campus sexual assault, the school he heads says. Falwell, the son of the late televangelist Jerry Falwell Sr., was described by Trump as one of the most respected religious leaders in the nation. Last year, after Falwell...
And what this respected religious leader would like to do, first and foremost,
Make it easier to get away with rape.
It's okay to rape people at college. My grief. What on earth? Okay, go on.
Falwell is president of Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, which bills itself as the
Yeah.
world's biggest Christian university.
Isn't Liberty University
biggest
also the
frickin'
place where
joke
you're
of a
not allowed
university.
to date somebody of a different color than you?
Why, yes, I believe that would be the same one.
Oh gosh.
And isn't it the same place that required its students to show up for a Trump speech there?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that does sound familiar.
Okay. All right.
A school spokesman, Len Stevens, said on Wednesday it was not clear yet when the task force would start its work. And I should mention that this story is from February 2nd, and also it's from religionnews.com. So, I mean,
Right.
I'm not always 100% sure how trustworthy they are in particular.
Okay.
Let's see.
But at least we get to see what they hope will happen.
Yeah. The Senate Education Committee sent Trump's nomination of Betsy DeVos, a charter school advocate, to be education secretary to the full Senate on Tuesday for a confirmation
Yeah,
vote. That already happened. She won.
Of course.
It was close enough that it required Mike Pence to break the dead even tie. Let's see. So I wonder if there's any more recent news on this. But yeah, that happened.
All righty. Well,
CNN also reports that evangelical leader Jerry Falwell Jr. is going to lead the education task force.
but
So
that's another
at
story
least-
from the same day.
Yeah, at least there's more backup. And also religionnews.com seems to have just been reposting a story from Reuters.
Right.
So
Okay. So so we don't know if they've actually started doing anything yet, or if they ever will.
I'm not seeing anything more recent than February 2nd.
All right. But yeah, I'm actually more interested in the lead up to your reading that story.
Yes.
I totally agree. I'm reminded of when George Bush was our president. Are we allowed to talk about historical political figures
ahead.
in a little more detail since
yourself
it's not
out.
an issue anymore? When George W. was president, right? And people could not. We're constantly arguing: is he, like a genius who's doing evil things, or is he just an idiot, right?
Right.
Or is he just incompetent? And we have the same kind of issue with, is the current administration incompetent?
Are they playing
or are
17-dimensional chess?
Are they?
Yeah.
Are they geniuses or are they incompetent? Well, it just recently there hasn't been quite as much argument about that. But my point is, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's a very slight tactical thing you do differently against an opponent that's a fool rather than a genius, right? But ultimately, when you're identifying them as your political opponent, what matters is what they're actually doing, period.
Right.
It does not matter whether it's informed by intelligence or by foolish ideology. It just does not matter. And wasting time bickering about the answer to that question is time wasting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Russell. Mm-hmm. Dennis, do you have a question today?
Do I have a question today?
Yeah. Do we have
Let me look.
Do we have time left on the show still? Okay.
I don't know.
A little bit.
Let's see. How about... sure, I got a question.
What's your question?
Christians insist that God is the final judge,
Yeah.
but do Christians judge God? Don't they?
I think I see where you're getting at.
I mean, they judge God all the time. They're saying God is good, Every time they do that, they're passing a judgment on God.
Russell, do you want to weigh in on this? I usually go
I've
toe to
heard
toe with
Dennis
Dennis on this.
I mean, I've heard Dennis do this bit or talk about this topic before.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't talked about it much as other things I've come up with, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on. I don't know. It's a complicated question because I mean, Christians have, a lot of Christian arguments basically wind up begging the question. That is to say, circularly proving things by assuming them first and then showing that the assumption leads to the assertion that it is in fact true.
Right. And is that really an analysis, or is that just a thing that superficially looks like the questions being analyzed?
Right.
Let me try another analogy. Suppose there was a person who was just constantly praising somebody else.
Uh-huh.
Right. Would you say that they're judging that person? Is just because they express an opinion as to the quality and character of the other person,
clearly,
is it a judgment, or is it just being a sniveling sycophant?
Well, clearly they have judged the character.
They are expressing an opinion, but are all opinions based on having made a judgment?
Yeah, it has to be.
You think so?
Wouldn't you say?
Let me put it another way. Suppose there was a person who every day, 5-6 times a day, gets on Twitter and talks about how awesome he is.
Okay.
Let's just suppose there was a person like that.
Yeah.
Would you say they had judged themselves?
Yes.
You would.
Of course.
Because your structure for this argument is, if you have an opinion, that opinion is your judgment, and saying it is proof that you have judged.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Well,
is that
I mean,
outside the realm of those words?
I can go with. I mean, I can see the point to evaluating the situation that way.
Yeah, sometimes atheists will judge the God as, they'll call God evil, right?
Sure.
God's this evil monster.
We do it all the time.
And Christians will say, you can't judge God.
But
yet they judge God to be
good.
good.
The difference is we've thought about it. And I'm going to try for a little while here at least, see if I can get any traction with this. Right?
Okay.
I'm going to try to argue that the thing is not a judgment unless it is based on some deliberation.
Right.
So a thoughtless opinion is not a judgment.
If our hypothetical,
and I don't know why I'm even
Christian-
trying to do this, because I actually want to agree with you. I really do. And I have in the past taken the stance that, look, you've got an opinion, therefore at some point you've judged.
Right.
I totally get where you're coming from. I'm trying to find
the hole in there.
Yeah, trying to find some loophole that they can exploit.
Just because he wants to disagree. But I mean, if our hypothetical Christian, it comes at the Bible for the first time and reads it through, not having been indoctrinated into it, and says, okay, here's all the actions that God commits. Here's all the actions that other characters commit. That God guy is really the best guy in the book. That would certainly be judging. But if you're like, but if you are raised on the idea that hey, the true standard and source of morality is the God character, and even if you disagree with the God, then you're just not understanding the situation enough.
Right.
Like Jeff says, it's gray.
If you're brainwashed, if you're inculcated in a religion, can it be said that you've judged it?
Right, Dennis. Somebody locks you in a room, and then getting fed and not getting smacked around is contingent upon you consenting to a position. And then that's done to you until it becomes second nature. Have you actually judged, or have you just been?
Well,
and
I can make
don't
all
wanna-
sorts of tweaky.
I want to defend
justifications for but that's a good point.
I want to take a step back and defend myself for looking for a loophole for the Christians because take a look at the kinds of loopholes that I'm coming up with, right?
Right.
I mean,
Now-
it does require them to have been brainwashed or to just have thoughtlessly accepted a thing without thinking about it, or
Right.
it's not. There is nothing laudable about
You're
the
pushing the envelope here.
about
You're making
having
it an
embraced-
extreme situation.
No, I'm saying there's nothing they can be proud of,
Right.
in having exploited the kinds of loopholes that I'm coming up with.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I guess a more specific question would be, did C.S. Lewis judge God?
Now, C.S. Lewis is without excuse because he wrote a whole freaking book,
Right.
Several books,
making his arguments. So he has totally got no excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He thought about it. He judged
God.
He judged
they,
the God.
They yeah.
But then the question is, would C.S. Lewis have said something like, well, you
now,
can't
if they're
judge God?
if they're just parroting the Bible, are they passing judgment? That is a good question. If they're
Yeah,
just
suppose they
parroting
passed-
the Bible.
well,
they're
suppose
they're passing a judgment on the Bible then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. But then if the content of the Bible is God's always right, they're accepting that God is always right because they've judged the Bible, not because they've judged the God.
God. Okay. So they can distance themselves a little bit. Wow.
Yeah, still not a position, not an stance
attractive position
to be proud of
Right.
on any level, because they're still just mindlessly taking something's word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I think that despite that loophole, I think a lot of theists do judge their gods in the way that you're saying, even if they claim they're not.
I mean, there are a lot of apologetics that are like considering other religions and say things like, "Here's the reason that Christian God is much better than
And that's
like,
a judgment.
Right. There's a great example, right? Every time they have a crisis of faith where, why would God do this to me? I'll just pray and accept it, right?
Yeah.
They're judging him.
Yeah.
Because then they're having to confront the consequences and having to deal with the actual question of, is there God in the right?
Yeah. Judge them all the time.
It's
Weird.
It's pretty easy to come
But
up
we're
with
not allowed to
loopholes to
judge
just
them.
about anything if you're willing to to work hard enough at it.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Cool. Well, that was a good one.
it seems to me we're
Pretty
winding
much.
down here.
Yeah.
Time now? This one
I have a
quick.
very short listener mail I could probably
Sure.
fit into
Go
our
for
available
it.
time.
We
this is-
read a total of one news story today, but that's fine.
Yeah, but we went over a bunch of stuff from
Yeah.
the news. And this is Elaine from New Zealand again. This time, though, not on the question of Nazis.
Right.
Elaine writes, I feel like the real reason that Christians are afraid of us playing God in creating life. I think she must be responding to something we said about genetic engineering. or
Yeah.
something.
Or maybe the extra DNA, the artificial life that some scientists are creating. That
Okay.
could be-
Is that it will ultimately prove that we're products of science and not a God.
Huh? Well, that's what they fear.
It scares them for existential reasons that they're not even completely aware of, like most things that scare them. Of course, they'll eventually find a foxhole to dive into and deny everything science has done like they always do, but for
course.
several moments they'll be shoved violently into an area where they can't actually deny natural processes made life, and that scares the ever-loving shit out of them.
Yes. Well, cognitive dissonance is a wonderful thing.
I'm sorry, Elaine, but I know, because I've seen it already, I know one of those excuses they can come up with, and it's pretty irritatingly bulletproof, right?
Yeah.
Because you gotta undermine their core assumptions. And that is, well, if a person can put DNA together to make a life, then that just proves DNA is a thing that could have been put together to make a life, and so why not say that
Yes.
God did it?
God did it. Right.
Right? If life was, it's like they get to win either way, which is
Yeah.
what's so infuriating about this, right? Because if there was no DNA, if people were based on magic,
Yes.
right, and there was nothing we could do, it turns out genetic engineering is impossible.
It doesn't work.
Because
Yeah.
it takes these little magical bits that we have no way of manipulating.
producing, yeah.
Right, no way to produce or manipulate them. Then they'd say, well, that proves that since we can't, that proves that God can.
did it. Yeah.
Which is also bullshit.
Right.
But yeah, they'll totally. I mean, we've got theists now making plans about what to do when we encounter intelligent aliens, right?
Right.
And how to deal with
and
them.
their plan is to show them how stupid we are.
We can sit here and be all smug about, oh, see, that will just show that there's, when there's life on other planets, isn't mentioned in the Bible. It'll just go to show that the Bible is just a limited man-made construct. Nope, they don't care.
No,
They
they'll
will find a
twist
way to
something in the
accommodate it.
Bible to accommodate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Barely on topic, but I would like to invite our readers to Google a comic called Caveman Science Fiction
Yeah.
about this idea that doing things yourself is progress, or no, doing things yourself is playing gods. It's like a short series of 4 little mini strips. The first one saying, with a caveman holding up like a stick on fire, going, "I am make science. I am put fire in cave." And then another one comes over and says, "You go too far. No control nature." He says, "No, am keep warm." And then in the last panel, everything's on fire. And he's like, "Me go too far."
Please send me that
Yes, I
link,
will.
Russell, because I need to share that with my Cave Master RPG fans.
Okay, Caveman
All
Science
right.
Fiction.
Well, everybody, thank you for putting up with another episode of our show. Dennis, are you ready to take us out?
Sure. And basically, that was all we had to say. Make of it what you can. We shall return in 2 weeks on the 1st of March if there are any left to hear us. Until then, you may hear the silent whispers of I Am the Satellite by Brian Steeksma.
Hey there, brother, don't you know the guy upstairs left us years ago? So there ain't no fate except the one you make, and there ain't no hell except the shit you take every day. So don't tell me life doesn't hurt, and that you don't need the people cause you've got your church. You gotta take your head out of the sky, because there ain't